All right, joining me now, Ti Windisch, who hosts the Eurostep podcast for the Milwaukee Bucks, does great Milwaukee Bucks coverage here. Ty, thank you so much for popping on. Let's talk about Milwaukee here. 7-4 record. It feels like it should be fine, and then some of the feelings are also a little bit iffy. And I think the perspective that a lot of people have from the outside is that it kind of feels worse than what the actual record is, and maybe what the actual numbers are. Why does it feel worse than it actually is in your mind?
Well, I think some of it is skepticism of rookie head coach Adrian Griffin, which is obviously fair. Whenever a rookie head coach comes into a situation like this, I think they're going to be, analyzed under a magnifying glass, even more so than, Mike Budenholzer would have been, who certainly was no stranger to criticism during his time at the helm in Milwaukee either. I think that's a large part of it. And also just the expectation was so big and the team looks so different than the last 5 years of the Bucks, both because of scheme changes and just the personnel. I mean, it's obvious, but without Drew Holiday and Javon Carter and Wes Matthews, adding in Damian Lillard and the guards they added in, you're just going to be worse defensively no matter what you run. That's kind of inescapable. And I think there was a real low point early in the year. The first 4 games before kind of Brook Lopez began dropping again, the team kind of came together with Griffin and said, hey, we have to play this way. Like, this is the way that we're going to defend best. Since then, I think the defense has been better. It's still not great. I don't really expect it to be great most of the time, to be honest, but it's been better. And I think the team overall looks better as well. There's still a lot to figure out. I think even me, like, the process is taking longer than expected to get everyone acclimated and on the same page. But overall, I'd say it was kind of started really excited. These first 4 games are kind of ugly. Since then, it's been uneven until last night in Toronto, the second game in Toronto for the Bucks this year. Not many easy wins, you could say. The Bulls one wasn't bad either, but I do think things are coming together. Damian Lillard rounding into form, so that's been really helpful. And I think overall, it feels like the Bucks are on a good track, even if they're not the juggernaut people would have expected in the first 10, 11 games here.
Yeah, definitely a bit of a Dame breakout game on Wednesday against the Raptors. 37 points, 13 assists, 16 free throw attempts once again, and a plus 25 in that game. That's a big time win. That's a big time performance without Giannis, especially. And the offense it's just not something people are going to be super concerned about. Yeah, he hasn't shot the ball well, but nobody really believes that he's just going to fall off a cliff immediately. Eighth in offense on cleaning the glass. It is really the 25th ranking in defense for the Bucks that I think has a lot of people spooked. I wonder if we could just talk about this like before drop versus after drop in terms of this actual early portion of the schedule. Is that kind of where you're looking for this from Brook Lopez specifically, or what about the perimeter defense is still kind of concerning to you?
Yeah, I think certainly I've been looking at the last, X N number of games minus 4 on NBA stats, or, I haven't looked at cleaning the glass as much, but just to see like, okay, what have they been doing, since they started defending that way again. And Brooks' numbers, I think you look at, they allowed 80% shooting at the rim, which was dead last the first 4 games. I believe they had a top 2 figure last time I checked before the Raptors game. And given the way the Raptors shot in that game, I'm guessing it didn't get much worse for Milwaukee. So Brook has had, I think, 5 or more blocks multiple times in these, like one of the only times he's done that in his career. So I think there's a little bit of a concern that I had before I dug into those rim numbers specifically. Like, is Brook not a good fit, or is Brook, has he declined a bit since being second in DPOY voting last year? The answer seems to be no, not really at this point. He's still defending the rim at a high level. I think the defense is coming with him. The perimeter defense is more of an adventure. I think there's a lot of Bucks fans and analysts, and probably myself included, who think Malik Beasley probably shouldn't be starting. The issue there is, once we kind of firmly reached this conclusion, gave him a few games to see, and he tries on defense. He just cannot really navigate screens at all, which turns out is a problem, especially if you're going to drop. Khris Middleton sits out first game of a back-to-back. Jay Crowder comes in the starting lineup. We go, okay, maybe this is like a sneaky indirect lineup change. Khris comes back and Crowder just stays. Well, then Crowder gets hurt and he's out 8 weeks. And then it's like, well, maybe Marjon could make some sense stepping in, but now Giannis is out for a game and they're starting Andre Jackson, probably just to add even more perimeter defense. And, you're not worried about spacing as much with that group if you're replacing Giannis in particular. And then Marjon against the Raptors goes out with a twisted ankle. So I think there's just been a lot of flux, and probably trying to make less lineup changes is better, given they've had to make so many due to injuries. So I think putting in a more defensive savvy player in that group could help the Bucks start stronger, which had been an issue for them before the last week or so. But overall, I think that's just going to have to be more of a personnel than scheme decision. I just don't think there's that many ways, you can really cover up starting Dame Lillard and Malik Beasley together. Their zone has probably been the best. They do that a fair bit, but again, it's, I think they probably just need a different look there. Crowder going out is just tough for that, though, because he made a lot of sense to slide in the way he was playing. Just a really unfortunate timing on that abdominal injury.
Yeah, so who then would you kind of go to in that situation? Is that more of a Marjon Beauchamp kind of addition into the starting lineup? Is that Andre Jackson, who a highly touted defensive rookie? Is it somebody else that we haven't mentioned yet? Who would be the ideal kind of running mate at that two guard for Damian Lillard in your mind?
I think Marjon probably makes the most sense with Crowder out of the picture. Andre Jackson, for all he does well, not a proven shooter, and the shot is, the form is, it's not picturesque. We'll say, to put it nicely. He makes them occasionally. We'll say it's gotten better. When he came in as a rookie, it was really like Lonzo Ball. Early stage is bad. Now it's just kind of a hitchy, not ideal form, but. I think Marjon is a little more polished offensively, and as much as you don't need offense per se in a group that's going to have Khris Middleton, Damian Lillard, and Giannis Antetokounmpo, I think you don't want guys that defenses just ignore, and they already kind of do it with Brook Lopez. I don't want to make it easy. I'm sure they will leave Marjon or whoever. I mean, they leave Malik Beasley, who's a great shooter. That's just the choices defenses have to make, but I'm a little worried about Andre Jackson and Giannis starting, although Andre Jackson does does work really well with the ball, even if he's not shooting. He's a good floater. He's a great passer. Anyway, I think Marjon makes sense. We'll see how, if any, time he misses due to the ankle. Outside of the two rookies, though, I'm not sure there's anyone else who makes a ton of sense to step in. One rookie and one second-year player. Bobby Portis did not start in place of Giannis, as many expected. I think that's kind of just to maintain the integrity to a certain extent of the big man rotation. Not start your two only real playable bigs with Giannis out of the lineup. Wouldn't expect him to start with Giannis either. And Campaign is just kind of the, come in for Dame, move the ball around guy. He has played with Dame some later in games, but I wouldn't expect him to start either. And that covers most of the rotation outside of, we got a little Thanasis, we had a little AJ Green. I don't think either of those guys are going to start either, to say the least.
Yeah, it does feel like the Bucks are a little bit hamstrung right now by injuries for one, but also just kind of a lack of choice on the perimeter when you're thinking about, okay, can we put together a good lineup defensively to bolster what Dame and Giannis are going to do offensively? I'm still kind of waiting for that, and I think a lot of people are waiting for that too. Let's talk about this Khris Middleton minute restriction. What's going on there? Because I think a lot of folks, especially when it comes to Milwaukee and why it feels a little bit weird. Milwaukee, like Khris Middleton is like one of the most important pieces for this team, and he's always been one of the most important pieces for this team, and it just feels like this minute restriction just isn't going away. What's the latest with him?
Yeah, it's been a little odd that it hasn't gone up more recently. The interesting thing about it is everything that we've heard, it's not like, oh, Khris isn't progressing, Khris can't play more. It's that they have their plan for him and they're being very cautious. I think last year kind of, maybe quickly ramping him up, and then there were some issues with his ramp up. Very sadly, his father passed last year, and kind of that took him away from his first ramp up, and then he had the injury and had to come back again. It feels like I don't want to say an overcorrection. I'm not a doctor or any sort of physical therapist or anything. Maybe it feels like an abundance of caution after what happened last year, and saying we're going to make sure he was at 16 for a little bit. He's been around 20 now. We're hoping to see mid-20s and then high 20s, in the coming weeks here. Still not playing back-to-backs. It feels like, from what we've heard, they want to be really cautious and make sure Khris is going to be in position to play his full best basketball, April, May, June, versus trying to get him back fully in November and then have some sort of a setback. So unless until we hear something about, his condition doing worse, I'm not, I would say, worried about it long term. You'd obviously like him to play more. It's weird, again, I'd love if Khris could play 30 minutes a game. That would help the Bucks a lot. But I guess it's like I just look at it as weird and a short-term negative for now, and hoping that it goes away before anything worse happens.
Last thing I have for you here, your belief, has that changed at all after watching these first 11 games? What are you kind of expecting from the group going forward, and kind of has these last 11 kind of changed your frame of reference for what to expect from this group at all?
I'd say it dipped after the first couple of games, and then since we've seen the defense, I mean, really it was just not tenable for two of those first four games. Kind of worked in two of the others. Just seeing the defense, have that respectability, that baseline of everything else goes wrong. We're giving up mostly mid-rangers. We still got Brook and most of the time Giannis in the paint. That should be enough when Dame and Giannis get more acclimated and get going. So I'd say it dipped, and now it's been slowly rising back up. I think it's been very clear to me these last couple of weeks that, John Horst built a roster to fit Drew Holiday at the point guard, and he is no longer there. And I've said things like this. People go, "Oh, you're dissing John Horst." No, I'm not. That he did a good job, I think, building around Drew Holiday. You're not going to say no to Damian Lillard just because you got Malik Beasley instead of Wes Matthews, just to throw, an example of two guys out there. So I think there's going to be kind of a shifting at the deadline. I think the period between now and then, when, a lot of guys aren't trade eligible yet, really big time for these young players. Your Marjon Beauchamp, your Andre Jackson, to prove, hey, maybe you don't need to get this guy. Maybe we can do this. I would expect they'll get someone anyway. John Horst loves adding defensive-oriented wings at the deadline. And I think a trade like that could help this group a lot, just as you mentioned, the balancing. But factoring in that probably happens to some extent, and this group is coming together, and I think Adrian Griffin is improving as he goes and fitting this roster better. And the adaptability he's shown gives me a lot of hope for the playoffs. It's really the opposite of what the Bucks have done. There have been costs to that in the short term. I do think being able to shift through multiple defensive coverages on the fly in games is a big deal for the Bucks, and it will help them. So I feel good. It's been a rockier road than I'd hoped, but I feel good long term about this team.
We will see what happens. He is Ti Windisch, host of the Eurostep podcast. Make sure to go check out all of his work covering the Milwaukee Bucks. Ti, thank you so much for taking the time, man. Really appreciate it. I'll talk to you in 6 weeks, all right?
Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me as always, Ryan.